Your liaison with TB Joshua caused a deep friction within Pentecostal circles.
I refuse to be bitter against anybody. I refuse to walk in any kind of hatred. I will never dislike anybody. You see, grounded in love. You got to make up your mind about such things.
This was Prophet TB Joshua, a man whom most ministers believe is involved in occultic practices.
You refuse to listen to negative things about other people because you are rooted and grounded in love, firm in love. When you walk in love, you're unshakable, and you will see what it will do for you now.
So did TB Joshua lay hands on you? Pastor Chris says, the answer is no. That did not happen. I was never a part of his ministry as alleged by Chris Okoti and others. I was never a part of synagogue. I met him for the first time in 2001. I have never been involved in their ministry and he has never had to minister to me. We have related as friends. I have many minister friends, even though we don't all exactly believe the same things. Interviewer: what about the issue of money? Pastor Tunda Bikare said he saw a vision in which you were collecting money or deposit slips from TB Joshua and concluded you must have compromised for the sake of filthy lucre. Pastor Chris says, the allegations that he gave me money and that he was sponsoring our television program doesn't make sense, considering our financial status as a ministry. TB Joshua must have been flattered to hear that from Pastor Bikare. It was all false. Interviewer: there is this videotape featuring you and TB Joshua healing a man from Holland in a wheelchair. A voiceover referred to you as the junior prophet. Have you seen the tape? Pastor Chris says, firstly, I have not seen the commercial or consumer version of the tape. But, I have a copy of the original edit that includes my whole visit and activities there. You know that as in several church organizations where they call the helmsman, senior pastor or general overseer. TB Joshua is referred to as the senior prophet at the synagogue. It's unfortunate that the commentator was not corrected in his error or assumption that whoever was ministering with the senior prophet must therefore be the junior prophet. I know some of the foreigners, who were not in the main service, when I addressed the congregation, could have thought so, because they were in the emergency section waiting for healing. I remember one of them in his testimony actually made that comment. Even though I was not offended, they should have been corrected. He made that comment. Your liaison with TB Joshua caused a deep friction within Pentecostal circles and sparked off a crisis that many believed was going to destroy your ministry. How did you weather the storm? Pastor Chris says, you see, what many do not understand is this. The so-called crisis period did not lead to anything. They were the ones that had a crisis. I was not in crisis. And this was what they did not understand. We have a firm Bible-based ministry. If a ministry like this could have been destroyed by things like this, that would have happened a very long time ago. So, I was not in crisis and did not need to weather the storm. I just went on with my business. This is an extract of the interview with Pastor Chris Oyakhilome about his association with Prophet TB Joshua sometime around 2001. This interview was published on the 17th of January 2005 at Daily Champion newspaper, as a response to the campaign of calumny against Pastor Chris for accepting the invitation of Prophet TB Joshua, who was accused by some ministers then of him operating with an occult power and not of God. Here is Pastor Chris' responses to the questions. Interviewer: your meetings attract the largest crowds in the country today, with estimated crowds of between 1 million to 2.5 million people. What is the catch? What brings people there? Pastor Chris says, it's not a catch. I believe we are given different gifts and callings. God uses us in different ways. I just think that is God's grace. You see, God has something to say and I am his mouthpiece. So he does three things. Number one is to give me the message he wants me to communicate. Number two is for him to draw the people he wants to hear it, and number three is to confirm the message with miraculous signs. That is the way I look at it. It is up to him. I am not sure that I have a personal control over that. I think it is just God's grace. Interviewer. Within the last 3 years, there has been a lot of controversy surrounding Pastor Chris from your association with Prophet T.B. Joshua, which led to your split with the mainstream Pentecostal ministers in the country, to issues of large donations to the ministry by members who purportedly defrauded their organizations, and then the ban on miracle programs by the National Broadcasting Commission. Your silence at every point gives the impression that you love controversies. Pastor Chris says, "It is not true that I love controversies. Jesus was a controversial figure and his ministry was controversial. Not because Jesus loved controversies or that he sparked off controversies, but because the people thought and acted differently from God's ways of doing controversy. And so Jesus could never agree with them. And that is where controversies begin, disagreements. So these so-called controversies were not things that I sparked off. Nor is it that I enjoy controversies. Then why was I silent? Because Jesus did not need to respond to his critics. So, I have found no reason to respond to them. One thing you need to know about your critics is this: no great man ever criticized a lesser man. Because only lesser men criticize greater men. You can only be criticized by those who are lesser than you. So the response to criticism should always be from that standpoint, and that immediately suggests that the one who criticizes you deserves no response. That is the reason why I have not thought of responding to them. Interviewer. How did your relationship with Prophet T.B. Joshua begin? Chris Okoti said then that T.B. Joshua recruited or ordained you into his cult way back 1986. Pastor Chris says, I remember in 2001, a lot of ministers, including Pastor Chris Okoti, Bishop Mike Okonkwo and Pastor Tunda Bikare, did say things along that line. The truth is that they were all wrong. They were getting information from the wrong sources. And it is unfortunate that they believed their wrong sources. Incidentally, none of them asked me intelligent questions. I hope to write a book on the episode someday. I have so much to say about all that transpired, maybe for the future. It was an interesting period, but the truth is that what they said was not true. I was surprised when the fact that I related with Prophet T.B. Joshua sparked off controversies. I was very surprised. You wonder why? Because I related with a lot of folks and nobody said anything. So I wondered why they got so mad about this one. Interviewer. This was no ordinary person. This was Prophet T.B. Joshua, a man whom most ministers believe is involved in occultic practices. Pastor Chris says, I was surprised that they all said that. Remember that Jesus visited non-followers, non-believers. And he was criticized by the religious folks of his day. They said this man eateth and drinketh with sinners. They said Jesus could not be a prophet of God because he ate and drank with sinners. I thought if I related with anybody, it shouldn't be a problem. Even if he was a sinner. There was no reason for that. After all, everybody needs the gospel. So from that standpoint, I was surprised at their response. It was the wrong response anyway. I remember that I made a tape then, called Truth on Trial. And there I said, just because you hate somebody does not mean I have to hate with you. When Jesus related with sinners, they did not change him. So, no matter what they thought T.B. Joshua was, my relating with him shouldn't have been expected to change me. So, it was very wrong for anyone to have interfered. They said he was of the devil. Well, that is between them and God. Interviewer. How exactly did you meet T.B. Joshua? Pastor Chris says, it was in 2001 that I met him or spoke with him for the first time. Contrary to the assertions of the PFN leaders. He called me on the phone. He had been watching our program on television with some of his visitors. And there was this episode of a little girl who was born blind, who received her sight at our crusade. He said he was moved by the miracle and decided to call me. That was our first contact. After that, We spoke several other times on telephone. At that time, I had only seen maybe 2 or 3 of his programs on TV. I did not know much about him at all, and so when he spoke with me on the phone, we exchanged pleasantries, and made references to what we were doing. In the process of time, on a particular Wednesday, several weeks after we had been talking on the phone, he called me on the phone and requested that I joined him in ministering to a particular man that was coming from Holland, during a special service that night. I said we'll be having a service, and he said his service was going to be all night long. I was going to finish mine about 9 p.m. and his was going to be all night. So I said, "All right, how long is it going to take me to get to where you are?" He said it's about 30 minutes, half an hour. I said okay. I went there with several people. We met for the first time, face to face then, and went into the congregation, and he introduced me to them. And I greeted the people. Of course, a lot of them had been seeing me on television, and so they were excited to see me come to their church. Shortly after I greeted them, I went with him to the healing section. We got to the healing section. He started out ministering to them while I was waiting, because I was only going to join him in ministering to the foreigners, based on his earlier request. When we got to the section where the foreigners were, most of whom were from Holland, we both ministered to the man who was sick of multiple sclerosis. I believe his name was Jan Westerhoff. That was about it. Now you must realize that before I met with TB Joshua, I'd been holding crusades and healing services for years. This was 2001. And by then I had held many crusades with thousands of people. And we already had our program, Atmosphere for Miracles, where we showed testimonies of people who were getting healed in our meetings. So healings and miracles were not new to me. When I met with him, of course I was excited, glad to see someone who was interested in the kind of things that I was doing. When these controversies came up, when these pastors, Pastor Chris Okoti, Bishop Mike Okonkwo, and Pastor Tunda Bakare got on television and began to say a lot of things, I actually had to maintain an association of sympathy with the man. There are so many things I have to say, like I told you. But these are all leaders in the church, and I wouldn't want to say things that would make them unhappy with themselves, or even make members of their congregation unhappy with them. I do not think that is my responsibility. So I would not want to go into certain details. Interviewer: did you at any moment think that your detractors were right, and you wrong? After all, you were the only man on your side of the divide. Pastor Chris says, I knew they were wrong all the time. Maybe I should define something, because the issue was not TB Joshua. They tried to make him the issue. He was not the issue. And I can prove that. The reason I said they tried to make him the issue is this. The president of the Pentecostal Fellowship of Nigeria, PFN, became the vice president of the Christian Association of Nigeria, CAN, of which the synagogue church headed by TB Joshua is a part. Cherubim and Seraphim is a part, Celestial Church of Christ is a part, and many other groups. In fact, he became the de facto vice president of the synagogue. And nobody said anything about it. There could be no better endorsement of TB Joshua from the PFN than that. If you could fraternize with all these groups as their vice president, doesn't that say something? If indeed any of them was really of the devil? Imagine Paul the Apostle as the vice president of an occultic group? The point is, TB Joshua was not the problem. They used him as the reason for their actions, which were based on their wrong spiritual perceptions. Interviewer: Okoti claimed that TB Joshua laid hands on you and ordained you into ministry. When a news magazine asked the prophet a question along that line, his answer sounded ambiguous, lending credence to Okoti's assertion. Interviewer: were you not concerned about the status of your detractors? You were pitched against the who is who in Nigerian Pentecostal circles, especially considering the fact that men of God like Bishop Mike Okonkwo and Pastor Adeboy of the Redeemed Church and even Matthew Ashimolowo made certain remarks about you then. Pastor Chris says, I did not mind. I was never bitter about it. They were all misled by their sources or assumptions. I have never met Pastor Oyakhilome or Pastor Adeboy. They don't know me. Even though Pastor Adeboy granted us the use of the Redeemed Camp facilities twice, several years ago, for which we remain grateful, I've never met him. But, whatever their comments were, I leave it all to God. You see, I have been brought up strong in the Word of God. I have walked with the Holy Spirit enough to know, like the Apostle Paul, that none of these things move me. And if you are successful, you expect people to come after you. If you amount to anything, you should never be surprised when people criticize you. Never be surprised when people rise against you and condemn you. Jesus said we should not be amazed when they say all manner of evil against us and accuse us falsely. Jesus was accused falsely. If I have been accused falsely and criticized by people, it does not mean anything. I am in good company because Jesus and the apostles suffered the same things. Jesus was accused, but they were successful, and so have I been and I'll continue to be. Because I am walking in the path of light. So I already knew the end from the beginning.